Welcome, kids, to the Minnie Moses Show, Easter edition. I'm Minnie Moses. Today I will be reading you a story about the resurrection of Jesus from the Child's Story Bible by Catherine Voss. Our story begins just after the death of Jesus on the cross. Are you ready? Here we go. Among those who loved and trusted Jesus was a rich man named Joseph. Before this, Joseph had never dared to serve Jesus openly for fear of the priests. Now that Jesus was dead, Joseph went to Pilate and begged to be allowed to bury his body. Another rich friend of Jesus was Nicodemus, the ruler of the Jews who, you remember, once came to talk to Jesus at night. Nicodemus brought 100 pounds of spices, such as the Jews used when a person was buried. In a garden near Jerusalem was a new grave which Joseph intended to be used for his own burial when he died. It had been carved out of solid rock, like many Jewish graves. Here they laid Jesus' body. They rolled a great stone in front of the entrance. By now it was sunset, and the Jewish Sabbath was about to begin. Jesus' friends left the grave and went home with sad hearts. They did not really understand the promises Jesus had made that he would rise from the grave after 3 days. They only knew they hoped so much that Jesus was the Savior long promised by God, and now he was dead. The next morning, the chief priests and the Pharisees met in Jerusalem. They congratulated each other that they at last had gotten rid of Jesus. Suddenly, one of them remembered that Jesus had said, "After 3 days, I will rise again." None of the priests believed that Jesus would really rise from the dead. But they were afraid his disciples might come at night and steal his body from the grave, and then tell the people that Jesus had risen from the dead. So they hurried to Pilate's palace and said, "Sir, we remember that while that deceiver was yet alive, he said, 'After 3 days I will rise again.' Therefore we request that his grave be sealed, for fear his disciples steal him away by night and tell the people he has come back to life. You may have some soldiers to watch the grave, and you may seal the opening," Pilate replied. "Make it as sure as you can." So the Pharisees and the priests hurried to the garden where Jesus was buried. They sealed the stone before the opening of the grave and set some soldiers to watch and make sure it was not disturbed. That Sabbath was a sad day for Jesus' disciples and the women who had followed him from Galilee. They met together in an upper room where the enemies of Jesus would not see them, and they talked sadly together about what had happened. These people had loved Jesus dearly, more than they had ever loved anyone before. They had hoped he would set up a kingdom and rule over his people, as David had done long ago. But Jesus was dead. A dead man could not become their king. All that day and night, while Jesus' friends wept together in the upper room, the watching soldiers guarded the grave. Just as the first faint streaks of dawn came into the sky on Sunday morning, all at once the earth began to tremble and shake. Big wide cracks opened in the ground. The soldiers were terrified. They were afraid that at any moment the earth would open up at their feet and swallow them up. While the earth quaked, a mighty angel of the Lord came down from heaven and rolled away the stone and sat on it. His face shone like lightning, and his clothes were as white as newly fallen snow. Terrified, the soldiers fell to the ground like dead men. When at last they dared to look up, they saw that the grave was open and empty. They ran to the city of Jerusalem to tell the chief priests and the Pharisees about the angel and the earthquake and the empty grave. Did the priests now at last believe in Jesus when they heard about the angel coming down from heaven to open his grave? No. No matter how many wonderful signs about Jesus were given to them, they refused to believe. The priests did a most dishonest thing. They said to the soldiers, "Tell everybody that his disciples came and stole his body while you were sleeping. Say nothing about the angel. If you do this, we will pay you well. And if Pilate hears that you slept on duty, we will persuade him not to punish you." So the Pharisees bribed the soldiers to tell a wicked lie. Now Mary Magdalene and several other women had also prepared spices to anoint Jesus' body on Friday night. All during the Sabbath they rested as God had commanded. Early on Sunday morning, before the sun was up, they hurried to the garden where Jesus had been buried. "Who will roll away the stone?" they asked each other as they walked through the silent streets of the city. They knew that they would never be able to move such a heavy stone. When they reached the garden, they were surprised to find that the stone had already been rolled away. They stooped down and went inside the grave. The tomb was empty. Jesus' body was not there. The women did not know what to think. As they stood there wondering, two angels in shining white clothes stood beside them. The women were afraid and bowed their faces to the ground. "Do not be afraid," the angel said. "You are looking for Jesus, who was crucified. He is not here. He is risen. Don't you remember that he told you that he would rise on the third day?" Suddenly the women did remember. He had said just that. They ran all the way back to Jerusalem to tell the disciples what they had seen. They burst into the upper room and said excitedly, "We found Jesus' tomb empty, and we saw a vision of an angel who said he was alive. But we did not see him." The disciples did not believe the story of the excited women. Had they not themselves seen Jesus' dead body? They completely forgot that Jesus had told them that he was going to die and be buried and then rise from the grave. Peter and John wanted to go to the grave and see for themselves. The garden where Jesus had been buried was more than a mile away, but in their eagerness to find out if he could possibly be alive again, they ran all the way. John ran faster than Peter, for he was younger. He reached the grave first. Stooping down to look in, he saw the linen cloths that had been wrapped around Jesus' body, but Jesus himself was gone. By that time, Peter also came panting up. He went past John into the grave itself. There were the linen cloths, and the napkin that had been wrapped around Jesus' head lay in a place by itself. John now followed Peter into the tomb. There were no angels to be seen, as the woman had claimed there were. Slowly, sadly, not knowing what to think, they went back to Jerusalem. Mary Magdalene could not stay away from the grave. She went back and stood there with tears rolling down her cheeks. Indeed, she had done almost nothing but weep these 3 days. Jesus had been so good to her, and now he was dead. She had been so greatly frightened to see the angel that she could hardly remember what he had said. She didn't understand that Jesus was actually alive again. His body was not in the grave, and she did not know where to look for it. After a while, she stooped down and looked into the grave. 2 beautiful angels were sitting there, one at the head and one at the foot of the place where the body of Jesus had lain. The angel said, "Woman, why do you weep?" Mary answered through her tears, "Because they have taken my Lord away, and I do not know where they have laid him." As she turned around, Mary saw something standing before her. It was Jesus. But Mary was so lost in her grief, and her eyes were so blurred by tears that she did not even recognize him. She thought it was the gardener. Jesus said to her, "Woman, why are you weeping? For whom are you looking?" "Oh, sir," Mary said, "if you have carried his body away, tell me where you put it, and I will take him again." Jesus answered with only one word, "Mary." When she heard that voice she so loved, Mary turned and looked straight at Jesus. "Master," she cried. It was truly her dear Lord. Mary was wild with happiness. While she looked at him with love and joy, Jesus told her to go and tell his disciples that he was going to ascend to his Father in heaven. How happy Mary was as she ran back to Jerusalem, to the room where the disciples sat together sorrowing. "He's alive!" she cried. "I have seen him myself. He came and spoke to me in the garden. He told me to go back and tell you that he is risen from the dead, and soon he's going to ascend to his Father in heaven." The hearts of these disciples who loved Jesus had been so heavy with the grief that they could hardly realize what Mary was saying. At last they began to remember that Jesus had told them all these things before they happened. They had understood that Jesus is stronger even than death. They began to believe that Jesus is the Lord of life. Soon he would see them all again. to my friends for the joke of the day.
Thanks, Minnie Moses. Knock, knock.
Who's there?
Moses.
Moses who?
He mows his grass once a week, and that's the joke of the day.
That's the joke of the day.
Minnie Moses.
Thanks, guys. Next week we'll have part 2 of our special Easter edition of Minnie Moses. You'll get to hear another special story read by a very special guest. You won't want to miss it. That's it for our show today. See you next time. Until we meet again. Shalom.
Shalom Havarim, Shalom Havarim, Shalom, Shalom. Till we meet again, Shalom.